Thanks for tuning in to the next edition of Behind the Editor's Curtain with Don Corrigan. Today, Don spoke to the Executive Director of the St. Louis Audubon Society, Mitch Leachman. They discussed the St. Louis Audubon Society's program called Bring Conservation Home. And now, here's Don.
Well, let's talk about Bring Conservation Home. What exactly is the Bring Conservation Home project, if you had to sort of sum it up in a nutshell?
Summing up in a nutshell is basically a habitat advice and certification program for individual landowners in the St. Louis region. We actually provide on-site assistance, actually visit with homeowners, visit with landowners in their landscape, find out what their goals and interests are, and then provide them specific written recommendations on how to improve the space for our native birds, butterflies, and so on.
Is this kind of the first year for the program?
No, the program actually was officially kicked off in the spring of 12, and we had a small pilot program in 2011, but we really went public in 2012, and have just continued to spread it around, word of mouth, small amounts of marketing here and there with certain partner communities. It's really volunteer driven. I'm the only employee, so our resources are finite. So even if we had the money for billboards, we probably wouldn't do one because we don't want to be overwhelmed and put people on a 6-month wait list.
Sure. So how much does it cost a homeowner to get involved with the program, and do they get a certain number of visits to come out and see the progress that they're making?
So being a nonprofit, we're not charging a whole lot of money, and we are providing a service that we think is not directly competitive with the landscape professional industry. So we're charging as little as $25 for Audubon members and folks that are active with a variety of partner organizations, and no more than $50, and those would be basically the general public. And you're correct to note the visits. So there's actually 2 visits that they would give for their fee. That's a combination of factors as to why we have the second visit in the bank, so to speak, for them. We'd certainly love to return to their landscape, down the road sometime to provide additional insight, additional thoughts, additional advice. Really what we're after is folks reaching back to us, pursuing our certification process.
So after I wrote the story about the South County gentleman who did this in his yard, Weldon Cox, a question that some people have had since reading that article is what's Audubon Society doing with pollinators and gardens for pollinators? Isn't Audubon Society all about birds?
Yeah, well, it's a common question, and the answer is pretty simple, and succinctly, it's all connected. There's certainly a stereotype of a variety of organizations, not Audubon only, of course, but, we just get sort of siloed into thinking about organizations, companies, and entities working on one particular thing, and yet when it comes to the environmental arena, you really can't work on one piece of the environment, one piece of nature, one piece of our backyards or habitat, and not be connected with and have an impact on almost everything else.
Sure.
So basically, this program is still about birds. We are Audubon. That is correct. Sure. We're proud of that stereotype and that connection. But we're going foundational. We're going fundamental. We're helping folks create habitat with native plants that are going to support a host of animals and organisms, not the least of which is birds.
Yeah, I guess it's kind of a circle of life thing. I just saw a National Geographic special that showed how there was this particular bird who knew how to handle a honeybee and get the stinger out before he chowed down on this bee. So I guess you're providing some places for birds to find food if that's their thing, eating pollinators.
Absolutely. It is circle of life. There are certain specialists, as you described. We have some tanagers here that breed in Missouri that are known to feast on bees and wasps. But even more than that, it's realizing that every one of Missouri's songbirds, and that includes our little chickadees and even the hummingbirds, every one of Missouri's songbirds eat insects during their life cycle. And again, we're not talking about eating bees or wasps, but caterpillars and small beetles and flies and gnats. And they're doing that primarily to feed their young in their nest protein. Because when you're a small baby, be you human or bird, you need protein to build your muscle and bone. And the seed in our backyard bird feeders can be helpful to a variety of birds especially the adults, but for the most part, that seed does not go back to the nest and is not fed to the babies. There's just not enough protein in any of those seed sources that we're putting out in the backyard. So again, this goes back to foundational, and that's why we're about native plants, and that's why we want folks and we encourage them and we help guide them to reintroduce native perennials and shrubs and trees in their landscape, because all of those native plants support that insect diversity, again, many of which could be food for those birds and other animals.
Sure. You know, another question we had after the Weldon Cox story was, how complicated can this really be? Because aren't bees partial to one particular species of wildflower or milkweed? So how complicated can it be? Doesn't it just mean that you have to put a certain milkweed in your backyard among all your other plants?
Well, interesting question, and it does come up once in a while, folks that are really sort of getting into this or getting a good understanding of what we're trying to do. And if we were looking to reestablish a very large landscape and make it au naturel and make it functional, we would have to get really, really detailed involved in exactly which plants and which species it's going to support and how would that work. But in our case, we're again focusing on these small landowners around the region, and we're really focused, most importantly, on what their interests are. So in other words, one homeowner might be really excited about monarchs, and they want their landscape dominated by plants that support monarchs. That's great, and we will provide them advice about that. But perhaps next door is somebody who just doesn't much care for that animal, and they're really excited about cardinals or something else.
So how dire is the situation for pollinators? I've read stories that when it comes to monarchs, there may only be 5% of the population that there was years ago. You know, everybody has read at least something about the honeybee colony collapse disorder. How dire is the situation? Is there just a matter of years to work with to try to bring back these populations?
Well, it's definitely urgent. There's no doubt that many of our organisms, from the monarch butterfly to a variety of bird species to some of those pollinators you mentioned, are in serious need. And 5% is a good number. I've seen that in a variety of sources, or in other words, roughly 95% of the wintering population of the monarch butterfly down in Mexico has essentially disappeared in the last 30 years or so. That's still millions and millions of butterflies that they're seeing there in the winter down in the forests and the mountains of Mexico. There's always hope, and we're seeing this year lots of reports of really good populations of monarchs that bred and reproduced here across the Midwest and the upper Midwest. I'm seeing them in my own yard in Maryland Heights every day, coming by and visiting the asters and collecting nectar and fueling up as they head south. So it is very urgent. I'm not aware of anybody who's putting a specific time frame or a specific number of years on any one of these organisms as to how long they have, but it is urgent.
So when I went out to, as a reporter, to cover Weldon Cox's garden and what he was doing with the program, he seemed like he was putting a lot of hours into this. Can you be a dabbler? I mean, he was talking about how he was told that he needs to take out these unnecessary plants, and he is looking for Mexican sunflowers. It seems like he's pretty involved. What's the time frame and the energy that has to go into this? Can you be a dabbler, or does it really take a commitment to make this work in your backyard?
You absolutely can be a dabbler, because quite frankly, native landscaping, landscaping for butterflies, spring conservation home concept, all of this is a hobby. There are very few people that are embarking upon this journey and are retired and or going to spend hours and hours every day working on it. Most folks are hobbyists, just like gardening with ornamentals. Not something that folks are doing well, some people certainly do a lot of hours in the yard, but no, you can absolutely dabble. I myself have a small suburban lot, and I have at this point some 60 to 65 species of native plants. I'm not sure exactly how many birds I've documented at this point, but on any given week, I might spend just a couple of hours outside I prefer to spend more time outside, but I work full time. I have other hobbies and interests, and you absolutely can dabble, and you can do this in as small a space as you have available.
Yeah, Weldon Cox was amazing. He's in his 90s, and he's out there when the sun rises, and he's still out there at lunchtime. So he's definitely one of these participants who's putting a lot of time and energy into it.
Exactly. And you know, for him, as I'm sure you learned, it's not just about what he's pursuing and the pollinators and, you know, the results he's after. Physically being outside and working in the yard is something that he finds very invigorating for himself personally, physically.
So how long does the season go for this program? You know, we're getting into late September. First freeze might come along in mid to late October. Once the first freeze comes, is the program pretty much in cessation until we get into spring again? Or?
Well, actually, we run the program year-round, and we're able to do that because we're not actually doing any installations for folks. We're just providing site survey and then the detailed recommendations. And we can look at somebody's landscape in the dead of winter and sometimes even with a little bit of snow on the ground and understand where the sun and the shade's going to be in the middle of summer. Again, find out what the homeowner's interests are and still be able to turn around and provide them a set of recommendations which they can peruse over those winter months, over those days of cold where maybe they're not outside, and then just be fully fired up and prepared and lots of good information to hit the ground running when spring rolls.
So if you come out for a midwinter site inspection, when would it be logical for you to return and do sort of an assessment of how the homeowner is doing with the garden? Or is that a time when they're certified as well?
Well, again, we're happy to return and honor that second visit whenever the homeowner would like us to come. We do certainly hope that it's at a time where they've established lots of conservation practices and we might be able to certify the space. That is the one exception because our hope is certification. It's very, very difficult, if not impossible, to certify a landscape outside the growing season. Mm-hmm. So the follow-up visits really need to be during the growing season, you know, from basically mid to late May into roughly now. If we get too much later than mid-September, we start to lose a lot of plants, and it's hard to tell exactly what was going on.
So how popular is the program, and what areas of St. Louis or St. Louis County seem to have the most enthusiasm for this program?
So, I mentioned this is the end of our fourth year. We've got over 500 homeowners enrolled, representing something upwards of 300 acres of potential habitat for our birds and butterflies. And it is a regional program. We basically honor the geographical spread of the St. Louis Audubon Society, which is the entire metro region, including the Metro East. It's so far been pretty well concentrated. Our center of interest is sort of the gardening center of St. Louis, if I'm allowed to say that. Mm-hmm. It's central to south to west St. Louis County. We've had plenty of response and support in the city and out in St. Charles. I haven't looked at the numbers recently, but we're looking at somewhere upwards of 2/3 of our 500 plus homeowners are in St. Louis County.
So is this a national Audubon program? And if it's all over the country, how does St. Louis rate in terms of participation compared to some other regions of the country?
So Bring Conservation Home is a label and program that we created here in St. Louis, but we built it on the backs of a variety of other programs that we learned about across the country. Most notably was a program in Portland, Oregon with the Audubon Society of Portland. So this program is local, is regional. There are other programs across the country. There is nothing at a national scale that is just like this program. The closest that one gets is the National Wildlife Federation Certified Backyard Habitat Program, which has been around for over a quarter century. And we also built some of our principles upon their program. But theirs is a self-certification. You go online, you fill out a form, you send in the form and some money if you want to sign, proudly display it, and it's a recognition for your accomplishments, but nobody's going to come to your home. The Wildlife Federation just doesn't have people in areas like this that they can actually come and do on-site support.
So it sounds like this program is kind of a feather for St. Louis Audubon's cap. How long have you been with the Audubon Society, and what is your current title with the Audubon?
I've been active with the St. Louis organization since 2001. I was a volunteer up until 2008 when they created the position of executive director. I applied and they hired me, and I've had that role ever since, although because of this program, Bring Conservation Home, which I am officially the coordinator for it and co-creator, that effort in coordinating the program is becoming a full-time job very rapidly. So we're going to be in a position before long as an organization looking to hire another staff person. We'll pick up, one duty or the other, either the executive director roles or we'll pick up the program for me.
Well, that's great. It sounds like it's a very successful program. How can residents find out more about it, and who do they contact? How do they get in touch with somebody at Audubon if they want to become involved and Bring Conservation Home?
The program starts with an online application. It's on our website, relatively easy to find on the program pages, and our website is stlouisaudubon.org. If one has questions or wants to, just sort of talk about the program or a particular question or situation they're facing, they can always contact me directly. My contact information is on the website as well, also with those program pages. And Don, if I may, I did want to add one other aspect about the program that too often we sort of forget to talk about with the small nonprofits of ours is sort of where the money comes from. We are fortunate as an organization to have some pretty good financial situations, and again, we do have a small funding stream from the homeowners, but it is imperative for us in the longevity of this program to achieve sustainable funding from grants and corporate sponsors and things. And right now, we're really happy with a 3-year partnership commitment we got from the Missouri Department of Conservation. They're providing significant funding to help us keep this program going.
Well, thanks, Mitch Leachman. I appreciate your time this morning. It's been a pleasure talking to you about Bring Conservation Home.
Thank you.
This is Don Corrigan with Environmental Echo. Until next time, have a good green day.